Hello, and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. I'm Dan Hall. This is a program about things seen out of the corner of one's eye, about shadows and what lurks in those shadows. This is a program about the unexplained and the unexplainable.
So welcome to Anomalies. I'm Dan. I have two teammates, I would say, Sara and Dave, and I'd like them to say something about why they're drawn to these kind of strange stories. Do you want to do that just as a way to introduce you? And then we have a guest tonight that we're going to introduce as well. So, Sara, why don't you lead us off?
Well, I just like entertaining stories that have unexpected events, and I'm a fan of some podcasts out there that do that. Of course, the name eludes me at the moment, my favorite one. But Snap Judgment has had some great stories.
They've had some good ghost stories.
They've had great ghost stories, and yeah. So I think that I like human experiences and stories.
Sounds good. Dave, what draws you to these stories?
Oh, I think at some point most people ask the question, what is the point? What am I doing here? What is life all about? The more you think about it, the more absurd life is on so many levels, because it doesn't make sense, to a human mind. So at some point, I think when you go down that path, you end up around the fringes, and around the fringes are where these topics lie. And so I just went one by one down the list, UFOs, what's that all about? You go down that avenue, and you're there for the next 30 years because it never seems to end and you never seem to resolve it. Sasquatch or Bigfoot, our topic tonight, mostly, is another one of those. Anything paranormal, once you get into one area, I think you are drawn into the other ones. I rarely meet people who are only interested in UFOs, but I'm not going to think about, crop circles or Bigfoot or anything else. I think once you're in one, naturally the doors to the others open also. So that's how I got, just asking the big questions. What the heck is going on?
So we're all drawn for different reasons to these stories. Let me talk a little bit about our guest tonight. I've known Sherry Mulholland, who is our guest, for over a decade. I used to live in the same community that she lived in and got to know her that way. I find her an extremely interesting person in a lot of different situations. I've seen her talents come out. But one of the things that I wanted her to be on the show tonight for was that I know she's had some experiences with Sasquatch, personal experiences. And then she has a unique perspective on kind of a broader view of Sasquatch. She is in a position where she comes into contact with a lot of Native American individuals in Native American communities here in Washington. And one of the things we wanted to do with tonight's show is talk about those different perspectives that Native people have on Sasquatch, because what I've come to learn is that they view this mysterious creature much differently than we do. So welcome, Sherry, to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start out with this. I was talking to a lady somewhere, I don't even remember where it was, about the fact that I was going to do a Sasquatch podcast coming up. And she said, what are you going to talk about that for? And I said, well, because it's kind of like Dave's talked about and Sara. It's just really interesting. And she said, yeah, but that was proven to be a hoax. And she got talking about, many people have seen that what they call the Patterson Gimlin film, which is shot in Northern California, and you see the Sasquatch walking across the riverbed. So this lady's saying, well, that was all proved to be a hoax because some guy, just before he died years ago, said that he put on the Sasquatch suit and that was him. So why get excited about that? So here's my question to you. What would you tell someone who tells you that Sasquatch isn't an interesting topic, or we shouldn't be talking about because it's a hoax?
Well, I don't think I could convince that person that Sasquatch is real. Sasquatch is in commercials now, so he's gone very. I think he gets royalties for those commercials. So he's very materialistic nowadays. Fish and the seafood that he likes is very expensive. So I'd have to say that, and his suit looks very good,
Yeah,
by the way.
it did.
And you know, I wasn't there, and I would just tell people that only the people that were shot the video, who were the men who were on the horseback that claimed that they saw this and filmed it, only they know the truth. But I think the interesting part is exploring different people's points of view on that, and the discussions that have arisen because of that experience. And will we ever prove it's rather a hoax or not? I don't know.
Well, do we really need to prove it's a hoax as far as you're concerned? Because as I recall in our previous discussions, you're a Sasquatch experiencer.
Yes.
So why don't you talk
I'm a believer.
Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
I believed Sasquatch was just a myth, like an urban legend when I moved up here from out of state, and I didn't think too much about it. And I heard about it from the native people up here, the Coast Salish people up here after I moved up here, and I didn't think much of it. I just thought it was a legend with the native people. But as time went on and I got closer and closer into the culture of the native people, I realized that there was a lot of people that strongly believed in this. This wasn't just a legend. This was something that was real to them. And so I thought, well, everybody has a right to believe. Like some people believe in unicorns and fairies, that's, and that's true for them. But about 4 years after working amongst tribes, I had an encounter of my own where the Sasquatch revealed himself to me, and I believe it was on purpose. He wanted me to see him, and I think he was showing me that he was watching me, and it changed my mind. It was very frightening, but it changed my mind, and so I've been a believer ever since.
Well, do you feel comfortable going into the details about that first encounter? What were you doing? How did Sasquatch appear to you? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. It was in the summertime, like it is now, and it was like, I got off duty at 8:30, and I was on the reservation, one of the reservations, and I stepped out of the building, was walking out to my car, and as I was looking past my car into a stand of trees on the other side of the parking lot, there one stood, and I don't know if it was a male or a female. I didn't look at it very long. I was very frightened, and I always grew up around a lot of animals. We always had dogs. We had hunting dogs. We always had big dogs, and I knew that with a big dog that's aggressive, you don't look it in the eye, that you look away, because I don't want to show any kind of aggression towards him. So I did the same thing with this creature, and I just looked down and speeded up my pace to my car, and I could hear the leaves rustling as if it was moving around, and I was listening very closely. All my senses were sharpened, and I listened very closely to see if I could hear him charging or coming up to me, and that's what I feared. And because I knew the size of this creature that was on the other side of my car, some maybe 25, 30 yards away from me, could just tear me to pieces. It was so massive, so big. And I wasn't close enough to see the color of the eyes. I couldn't make out little details about him, but I just know that it frightened me. And so I got to my truck and I looked back up and it wasn't there. And I was thinking that, I thought later that the rustling of the leaves and the brush must have meant that he backed back into the tree line to where I couldn't see him, knowing that I was frightened, because I was. I almost peed my pants.
Which is very believable and understandable.
Yeah.
So this is Dave interrupting here. Sorry, Sherry, but I have to know. It sounds like it was a case of where you took one look and you knew this is not a bear. This is not a person in a suit. This is not. What else would you confuse with a large hairy hominid?
Yeah.
I mean, you saw immediately and you went, okay.
I've seen the movies.
And how big, how tall?
I'd have to guess it must have been at least 8, 9 feet.
It was
big.
so.
It was big. It
massive.
was big. Yeah, it was massive. I mean, it was broad, and it was just had tremendous. It was a tremendous sight that I just figured it could really twist my head off if it wanted
It just
to.
looked
Yeah.
muscular.
Oh gosh, yes.
And was it hair? The
Lots
entire
of
body
hair, lots of
covered?
hair, and it was dark brown, and I don't think it was black because it looked lighter than black.
So this is not something that you would mistake a tree for, or
No.
or even a bear at that distance would be terrifying,
Yeah.
but a bear looks like a bear, and they don't
Yeah.
stand like
Straight
that.
up, and there's no brown bears. There has been some brown bears up around in Whatcom County and that, but they're not that big. Even if they stand on their hind feet, they're not like
And
8
they
or
don't
9
look
feet tall.
humanoid.
No.
That's what this
Did
creature
it have a kind of a human face too?
I think it did, yes. Yeah.
Wow. So who did you tell after you had
I
that
didn't
kind
tell anybody right away.
And why not?
I didn't believe it before, and I just figured people ain't going to believe me. I mean, it's a lot easier to talk about leprechauns and bears than it is about Sasquatch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Dan mentioned that you had multiple encounters, though. Is that true? Have you seen?
Yes. Well, 2 later, and it was on the same day. And I had, I where I go on the different reservations and all. They know my car, and I say they. I mean, I believe there's families. I call them pods, like we would
Families of
whales.
Sasquatches?
Yeah, like we would call a pod of whales. Family unit. I call them that too, just because it's just easier for me. And I believe there's family units, and from where I go and where I visit and where I move around, I believe they know my vehicle pretty well. I've been going on the different reservations for about almost 20 years, and I think they know my voice. I think they know what cars I drive. I think they know my smell, and they seem to be comfortable enough to show themselves to me. And I was at a place, and it was on a beautiful another summer day in the daylight, and of course the first encounter was during daylight. Now this second one was also during daylight, and it was at a place where I often put food down for them. And I shouldn't say down, we'd put them up high in the trees. And I had just changed cars because I just bought a new car and sold the other. And so I went from a van down to this little economy car. And so me and my cohort, another lady that go out with me, we were putting food out for them. And we were sitting around this location for about a half hour talking, and we always made a lot of noise. We wanted them to hear our voice and be familiar with it. We wanted them to come closer, and we'd always look for footprints and stuff. And we drove away, and as we're driving away, when I'm driving away from any location, I always check my mirror, and because I always figured there could be one crossing the street right behind me. And sure enough, one stepped out from where we just was and stood in the middle of the street looking at us as we drove away. And my friend that was with me, my companion, she was on her phone checking for texts from her partner that might have texted her, so she didn't see it. And I'm stopping and I'm saying, "Do you see that?" And I'm hitting the brakes and I'm turning around. Well, it just steps off the road the minute I'm trying to turn around. And I'm watching it, and it's like it just happened so fast. And so I go back up there and we sit back around. And I says, "Oh man, you should not have been on your phones." I'm one of these people, when I'm out on investigation, I don't have no phones on. And I don't, and this person just can't live without that phone in her hand. And so she missed out on that sighting. And of course, I wanted another person to see it with me. I mean, that was part of the payoff to me, is to have another person witness it with me. And so I'm saying, "Oh man, I can't believe you were on your phone." And blah, blah, blah. So we're back up there and we're sitting where we hung the food up. And I'm telling her, "Man, I wish you had seen that. Dang, you've always wanted to see one and you missed your chance." I mean, I'm going on and on and on. So we decided, we waited and looked around, and she walked around and all that. So we decided to give up, and we got back out on the road, and we're starting down the hill, and it steps out again. Honest to Pete. Now this time she saw it. Mm. And so we're both going, "There it is," And so I'm hitting my brakes and I'm whipping that car around. It's a little car, and it's a little bit smaller was out in the driveway. It's a smaller one than what Dan drives. And I'm whipping this car around, and of course it takes one step, and off the road it goes. So we went back up there again, and we're both talking about it. We're so excited. And of course we tried to debunk it. We drove back and forth and all that kind of stuff to make sure there wasn't something that could have created that outline and everything like a Sasquatch. And it was just a classic outline like you'd see on a t-shirt, where there's the woods on the side and this big, massive body of a Sasquatch. It was just like that. At the top of this hill, you see nothing but daylight behind it. And so he was blocking out the daylight because he was right at the top. It was just gorgeous. And so we tried to debunk it, of course, and we couldn't find where maybe a limb was coming down or anything like that. There was nothing that was creating that image again. So we went back up there at the top, and that was the last time we saw him. A lot of traffic started coming by on that road. And I had 2 visions that day, and she got 1 sighting of it. And I got to thinking about, I wonder if it knew from our conversation, maybe, and I don't know if it's like it could read our minds or what's going on, it communicated with us, but knowing that I wanted him to show himself again. And so he did. I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to experience it. And so that was pretty exciting.
Did the second creature that you saw, did that look, and realizing you don't have a real good look at it, did they look similar?
The shape and all, yes, but I couldn't tell you about the color because he was more of a shadow blocking out the sunlight behind him, or the sky behind him. So it was the figure, and I couldn't make out any features or any color of the hair or anything like that. But it was awesome.
And they made a believer out of you.
Oh yeah.
Sounds like.
Oh yeah.
The first native people that you shared this with, what kind of response did you get from them?
I don't think they believed me, or what I've run across a lot of times with Native people is when the first few years I worked with Native people, I think they saw me as a Wanitan, which is a Coast Salish word for non-native. But I think they accept me more like I'm kind of adopted as a native, and they call me Auntie now. And most of them do call me Auntie. And they share their experiences with me now. But back in those days, what you're asking about, I think a lot of them were like, I don't think Sasquatch would show himself to a white person. In other words, I think they viewed Sasquatch allowing you to see it is a gift that they give you. And they tell me many times that Sasquatch honors you with their presence. And that it's a gift. And then also I think they think that I'm just a silly white woman. And that's in the beginning years, yeah.
It wasn't that they didn't believe Sasquatch existed, it was they believed that he or she would not reveal itself to you. So that was the disbelief part, just to be clear.
Yeah, that's what I think.
My question is, the native people that you've worked with, is there a consensus that Bigfoot and Sasquatch is among them and has been for decades, centuries?
I believe so.
Is it? What's your feeling on how
Very
many
rare.
Is there a group of skeptical natives, and if so, are they of a particular group?
There's a small number that's telling me they don't believe that Sasquatch exists, that they've never heard them or had any encounters with them, but it's a very small group. And a lot of times when I meet with a group of natives, we get on the subject of Sasquatch. Most of them love talking about Sasquatch. They don't like talking to Sasquatch. It took me many years for they'd open up around me about Sasquatch. So they just don't talk about it with everybody. It would be hard to find somebody who would actually interview about it. And but they're getting more and more open-minded. I know a lot of natives that I talk to now when we're talking on the subject will tell me they're watching the programs on TV, like In Search of Bigfoot and those other programs.
So as Dan mentioned at the very beginning of this segment, it seems that there's kind of an opposite situation. Well, at least in our experience, you talk to people, it's a very small minority who are like us and think the evidence suggests Sasquatch is a creature, a real creature. But you're saying the opposite exists maybe in the Native American communities, and that the minority are the people who don't believe.
Yes.
As opposed to, our minority, I'm just lumping us in with the non-Native American community. Why do you think that is, that there's the exact opposite situation?
I think for generations and generations that go back way beyond they even know about, the families, the culture has always grown up with the tales of the Sasquatch. It's been a part of their culture and a part of their teachings, and they teach through their verbal language, and it's been passed down through families, through the generations, and it just is, we kind of accept like Abe Lincoln here, and George Washington chopping down the cherry tree and all that, and they accept Sasquatch. That's their culture, and that is sort of like some of them might think that like Sasquatch belongs to them.
I've heard that in all the different tribes, that each tribe in their language has a name for what we call around here Sasquatch. Can you verify that, or do you know any of the other names?
I don't know a lot of the different names because, I knew a man and he used the name Quashus. He was a wonderful man. He was a teacher, one of my mentors. And Quashus met Sasquatch, and he carried Sasquatch medicine. And I don't know, that might have been the Sioux language, because he was a dancer in several traditions, in the Coast Salish tradition, but he was also a plains powwow dancer too. So, and he very close friends with a lot of people who spoke the Lakota language. So it might have been because I haven't heard nobody call it, and the Coast Salish people I've talked to, I've heard nobody calling Sasquatch Quashus. So I think that might have been Lakota, but I just hear them talk about Bigfoot and Sasquatch, that's all. We keep it pretty simple.
There is a book out there, and I should have looked for the author. It's called Rain Coast Sasquatch.
Yeah.
And are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Do you know the author? I don't remember the author.
I don't.
But one of the things that I was struck by is what Sara's talking about, was in that book there was a chapter on all the different names for Sasquatch and different tribal names, and there were things like Bukawas, Sonequa, and I found it just kind of interesting that all these different tribes, some of which had cultural similarities and some of which didn't, they had a Sasquatch-like figure as part of their lore or their cultural traditions, just had different names for it.
Yeah, and one thing that, for people who don't know me, I'm not a scientist in any way of the means. I'm a farmer's daughter, I'm a very simple person. And most of these people that I'm talking about, these Native American people, these Coast Salish people, are fishermen, people who live on the reservations. They're not what you'd call scientists either, but they have a simple life, with simple jobs. A lot of them work traditional, like on the water. That's how they earn their living. And the Coast Salish people say that when the tide is out, the table is set. And that's true for Sasquatch too, because many of the sightings are where Sasquatch is out collecting oysters, and they see him stooped over and cracking oysters and stuff and eating crab and things like that. So they're just people like me.
So it sounds like Sasquatch is just a part of the the ecosystem with the Native Americans, and you kind of say, well, these people aren't scientists, but you can make a really good case that scientists often outthink themselves to the point where they don't believe their own observations. So I would trust a simple farmer or fisherman as an observer in this particular case as much or more than I would trust a scientist. Yes, of course, everyone wants video and audio and definitive proof and all that, but what it sounds like is the Native American community is not concerned with proving something that's already a part of their lore and something they've understood as, it sounds almost as not common, but as a wolf or a bear or another animal.
Exactly.
So my question is, does Native American lore, in your experience, categorize Bigfoot as a different kind of animal with different capabilities or purposes? I mean, do they hold a special place in that because of their rarity, or maybe just their size, or their... They
believe that they have the ability, they have red eyes when people see them. When you get up close to them, they have red eyes, and people believe that they can make you sick. And so I'm always warned by people when they talk to me and they know what I do. They say, don't get too close because he'll make you sick. And how they've described that to me is he makes them Indian sick. They call it that. And then you have to be worked on by Indian doctors, which is a whole nother thing. And basically what it is it's almost like you go into a state of shock, and it's mainly by the eye-to-eye contact. And what is those animals? Is it a fish or something where I can't think of the term. I know Dan knows it. We've talked about this, where they can shock their prey.
Oh, yeah.
What's that called?
You said I would know. No, I can't take it.
Yeah, I can't remember it either. Like
They
I said,
send
I'm not a
out an
scientist.
electric shock through
Yes.
the water.
Well, the fish can, I think, and
Yeah.
so it stuns the prey long enough for them to. Yeah.
Mhm.
Or I think there are some thoughts about animals who are able to kind of hypnotize
Exactly.
their prey, and that makes them easier to then catch that particular thing.
Right.
So you think
So
they're
they
talking about
believe.
something?
I think that's kind of what they're thinking about,
Yeah.
and they call it being Indian sick.
So they do hold a different ability, maybe
Yes.
separate type
Yes.
of ability, which gives them a status that's, of course you'd want to be careful around a wolf or a bear,
Sure.
any other wild animal, but I'm just wondering, does Sasquatch hold its own level of that ability?
So that brings up the question.
It sounds like yes. Is what
Yes, I
they
would
say
say
stay
yes.
away.
Yes,
But what do they say
don't
about
get
a wolf?
close.
They don't say go up to a wolf and
Yeah, beat it.
say hi. I
Yeah.
mean, they respect every animal in the animal kingdom is what
Yeah.
it comes down to. I'm just wondering, because, Dan is familiar with the reports of Bigfoot being able to do, like you mentioned, read your mind or affect you in a certain way. Not always in a nice way, but then again, like you said, this giant muscular creature could tear you apart in an instant, and clearly we don't see reports of that, ever. So there's something
They don't
about
get
them
aggressive.
that's non-aggressive, at least.
I think of them as being
Naturally.
socialized. They're so used to people and cars and our everyday lives, and on the reservations. I mean, their everyday lives. And I believe they become socialized. And I think they know the different families, and they know the homes that they go and hang around. And I think they have a familiarity with that.
So have you heard of any reports or stories of kinship with them, making friends with the Bigfoot family? Or is there a definite
have.
separation between...
I have. I've known people that tell me that they actually stand out in circles with them, with the family. Yeah, and that there's a massive one that I guess is the head, the male, the dominant male, and then there's others that are maybe like 7 foot tall, which would be little. Yeah. So yes, I've heard that from not just one person, but from several people, and so they say they can talk like a language, and I think it's more telepathy.
Mind-to-mind communication.
Yeah.
Although, interesting you'd say that, some people might know the name Ron Morehead, who was I think he's a hunter, and he hung out in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California, and he encountered Sasquatches, and he recorded some of the sounds that he heard coming from the Sasquatches, and they're kind of marketed under the name the Sierra Sounds, but he's had linguists evaluate the sounds. And the linguists have said, these aren't just sounds, this is a language.
And people think we might be veering off into, even for us, into a land where it's, oh, come on, give me a break. Telepathy and, hypnotizing and whatever. But my argument would be, and we've had this discussion before, is that you look at the abilities of animals throughout the animal kingdom. You just mentioned one, shocking prey at a difference. Animals have sonar built in. There are plenty of weird creatures that have unique mechanisms to attack and paralyze their prey, and it isn't unreasonable to think that Sasquatch has evolved or over the years has or naturally just had the ability to communicate on a different frequency, possibly, or some of these abilities don't seem outrageous when you look at other animals and their abilities too. And that sounds like the Native Americans kind of accept that as a reality too. Is that your experience?
I wanted to interject something. The book, Raincoast, for our audience. Raincoast Sasquatch is written by J. Robert Alley.
All right, thank you.
And it's the Bigfoot Sasquatch records of Southeast Alaska, coastal British Columbia, and Northwest Washington from Puget Sound to, is it Yakutat? Y-A-K-U-T-A-T?
I don't know. Not familiar with that.
Yeah, J. Robert Alley.
Alley.
Thank you.
A-L-L.
Just like the alley. Yeah, A-L-L-E-Y. Yeah.
So this discussion leads this question. We're kind of hinting around at it. What is Sasquatch? Is it a flesh and blood, simply a flesh and blood animal that the white culture has one view of and kind of views as a mystery to be solved? Or is it, and of course there's a different view from the native side, that it's maybe not as mysterious, it's more a part of the natural environment. I've heard some very interesting stories about Sasquatch. People are following Sasquatch tracks in the wilderness or someplace out in the woods, and they just stop. And some people interpret that as the Sasquatch blinks in and out of contemporary reality. So what do you think Sasquatchy is?
Well,
Speculation.
Yeah, really. And in the beginning, I used to think it was flesh and blood, just like us. And when you hear tales about fishermen saying, the tide was out and they watched Sasquatch eating oysters and clams and that, it makes you think they are flesh and blood and
Animals.
Right. And they're consuming food just like us, and they need nourishment. But then lately, in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, I've kind of opened to them being a spirit more, maybe a shapeshifter possibly. So I'm not sure what, I couldn't really tell you what I believe, because I might think one thing today and then I think it's something tomorrow, because I have a real open mind, only from different accounts I hear, and I think a lot of the Coast Salish people have different accounts too. I've heard that it's a spiritual being from many of the people as well that also agree with that, and that's the thought that they have. And then I go back to the others that believe that, they're the ones stealing the fish out of the fishermen's nets and things like that. So it's like, if it's a spiritual being, why would it be wanting to consume salmon? I don't know. So it doesn't make sense that way. But I know one time I was interviewing a native man who's had quite a few experiences, actual sightings with Sasquatch, all through his life, and he's probably in his 40s. And I was recording him, and when I played back the recording, and I don't have that recording anymore, this was about 10 or more years ago, when I played it back, there was a growl, like a spirit of a Sasquatch was in the room with us.
Huh.
Yeah, it was really awesome. Yeah. So, there was one in spirit there, I think.
So when you say spiritual being, define that a little bit more. Does that mean like define that a little bit more.
I don't know. I mean, I'm really way out there on some of these thoughts. Like I say, I haven't opened
to a physical body, right? Something that can
maybe what do you call it?
Dimensional?
Yes, that, or I was thinking interplanetarial, whatever these big words are. It can come from dimension to dimension. I had a gentleman once, and this was the guy who was one of the guys who was telling me about. He was standing in circles with him. Say that he seen him leave and go over some bushes, and then a white light just went up and then disappeared, almost like he boarded what Hollywood would put, like he boarded a spaceship or something.
Was abducted.
Yeah.
There are a number of accounts too, so you can't really discount that connection, even though some of us would like to, because it just makes things so complicated. But there are there's a handful of cases I know, Dan has read, and I've read, where there was a Sasquatch connected, as you say, with some sort of other paranormal phenomenon. UFO specifically, but as you point out, why would a spiritual being who can, doesn't have to adhere to the laws of physics as we know them, why would it need to go dig up food, and eat food? Why would it need to blah, 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 things that physical beings are?
I guess good question, my perspective on that would be, we're all spiritual beings. Mm-hmm. We just don't maybe have it developed to a point where we know we have it, or others see it, or and I guess what is a spiritual being? Is it something with a connection to our source, whatever we choose to call that? And does Sasquatch have a greater awareness of that and connection and utilizing their full capacity as maybe a mammal, or
kind of a commentary on humanity, I think, because we probably all agree that the animal kingdom in general has more of a, quote, spiritual connection, a connection to its source and its understanding of its place in the animal kingdom, and compared to humans who tend to wreak havoc across the planet, so
You
it's
know,
sort of a...
I saw a video,
Good
maybe you've
question.
seen this. I'm sorry interrupting you.
No.
I saw, maybe you saw this too. There's a video, I saw it on Facebook, of a little octopus, and he was trapped or stuck or something, and a guy reached down and helped him out of whatever situation he was in. And the octopus went away, and then he came back, and he touched the man's sandal or foot with his tentacle. And people have talked about how intelligent octopus are. Mm-hmm. And I just think we don't have any idea, and dolphins, and how intelligent our animal kingdom is. And where Sasquatch fits into that, we don't know. Are they from another planet that are visiting? Do they go back and forth? I
may
don't
just
know.
be an offshoot of Homo sapiens sapiens, which is us, and they didn't lose, or they weren't, as Sarah's saying, we seem to have lost our acknowledgement of the connection to our source, or we never developed it, or we were intentionally, and this is where you get real conspiratorial, we were intentionally suppressed in that way for a reason, genetically altered or affected or whatever. I mean, so it would seem that it comes back to the idea that humans are the anomalies rather than these hairy creatures. They're part of nature, and maybe Native Americans acknowledge that in some way that white culture or the rest of us don't.
You've said, Sherry, that you've been told by different Native people stories about their interactions with Sasquatch. You want to share any of those stories?
Well, when I hear stories about people who are, let's say, up in their 40s and 50s, they talk about their childhood experiences with Sasquatch. And their stories are usually very traumatic. Sasquatch was teasing them, frightening them, chasing them, banging on their houses, that sort of thing. But nowadays, as we get closer to our present day, it's just the opposite. It's almost like it's a respect between man and the Sasquatch. And it's almost like an understanding. And I used the term socialized earlier. And it's almost like people come home at night, and there's some family members inside watching TV, for instance, and they'll come home and see one standing in front of the picture window watching TV with the family standing outside. Yeah.
Now that sounds like a commercial.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. But it's
Sell
often
something.
you hear those sort of things. Or they'll be looking in the kitchen while some people are in there cooking and that sort of thing. So they're watching us. That's what it seems like. And I hear a lot of stories. I made the comment earlier about them taking salmon out of the fishermen's nets. The fishermen, when they're down on the rivers and they have their nets out, they'll feel the net being tugged, and at the other end of it is a Sasquatch taking fish out. So they're fishing for the Sasquatch as well, and they accept that. They let them take their fish, whatever they want, their bounty, they're sure of it. And then they leave them alone. And it's sort of like, hey, we're one hand washes the other, sort of thing. And like I say, it's socialized now. So, back when they were children, they were traumatized by them, and the Sasquatch was apparently more aggressive. But today, the fishermen feed them. I remember, this comes back to being fed, and then the spirit, the shapeshifter. In the winter times when it's really bad, fishermen, they put their fish up to last through the whole year. And they have freezers of it and that sort of thing. And when the winters are real bad, they put fish out for them. They hang up in the trees for the fish, and they thaw them out and everything else, and then put them out there and hope the Sasquatch come and get them. And of course, the fish most of the time disappear. So it's like an offering they give them, and they want to take care of them. Sasquatch is important to the people. And especially the fishermen know. They hear them. They see them, and they're out there coexisting side by side. And so there's a lot of respect.
I guess something that comes to mind is, what do we do about Sasquatch? And the answer to that might be different if you're talking to a person from the dominant culture versus the native culture. What do we do with Sasquatch? I mean, I know people in the Sasquatch community, and I'm talking about non-native people, who there's a whole group that feels like, well, we need to go catch one. And it could be dead or alive because we need to study it.
Yeah, how sad.
Well, and that's where they're coming from. I don't particularly agree with that. I don't think that's where a lot of native people would be coming from. So what do we do about Sasquatch? And maybe talk about that from the dominant culture, the white persons. Should we be out there looking for it? Should we be trying to bag a carcass so we could study it? Should we put one in the zoo?
I hope not. I love animals. And I'm a big animal lover, and I'm a people lover too, and so I don't know where Sasquatch fits into that, whether he's more animal or whether he's more human, but it's like killing one. It's sad. It's a sad thought to me. I don't think people should be out there looking for him like that. I used to call myself a Sasquatch hunter, but that sounds like maybe I have a gun out there, and I'm or a bear trap out there trying to trap one. But no, I call myself an investigator. And so to get away from that word hunter, because there's a lot of native people that I believe could have bagged one for that big $1 million prize that they used to talk about years ago, or for the notoriety of it, but choose not to.
Yeah, by and large, native people aren't interested in that, right?
Not yet. Now, I do know of incidents where a native gentleman that's really into researching Sasquatch invited, in search of Bigfoot, one of those productions, onto his reservation, and the council of the reservation shut it right down and wouldn't let him film because the elders of the reservation said, no, we are not going to have this. That this is a sacred thing. This Sasquatch is a sacred being to us, and we don't want you coming on and making it into something to glorify your show. Mm-hmm. So they were asked to leave the reservation, and I thought that was okay. I was okay with it.
And Sherry, you made a good point. Prior to the interview, we had our little discussion, and you said with all the cameras and lights and everything, no Bigfoot worth his salt would be anywhere near such commotion. So the very idea of taking a camera crew out into the forest and thinking you're going to find a Bigfoot, just surprise him while he's cooking dinner for his kids or something. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. And you can make that argument for a lot of other areas that we talk about too, is that nature doesn't just bend to your will because you want to go, subdue it or study it, especially something that has some amount of intelligence. And clearly Sasquatch must be an intelligent being on some level, or maybe levels we don't even understand.
I agree.
It's frustrating because that elusive evidence, may never be found, may never be acquired to convince other people, to convince a broader market. But then again, you have to ask, is that what needs to be done? Do we need to convince people? And you as an experiencer have said you don't care if other people believe, because you know yourself that. And if only the rest of us could be in that position,
After this Sasquatch showed himself to me, it sort of became a journey for me. And I'll share it with people who want to listen to it or want to hear more about it, but to convince anybody is not important to me. And I don't know when people walk away that's never had experiences with Sasquatch is going to believe me, and that's not important to me either. Like I say, it's my journey. I was talking to a respected Coast Salish gentleman a couple months ago. I was in he's a professional man, and I was in his office, and he had a blanket with that was made for him, and it had the figure of Sasquatch on it. And I says, oh, you're into Sasquatch too. And he talked about his father and how important Sasquatch is in his family. And he says, my father, and I said, can I repeat this? And he said, sure. And he says, Sasquatch has been teaching that is passed down for many generations. And his father and his elders have told him that Sasquatch is a symbolism of the spirits of their ancestors, and that it is a spiritual being. And the reason that there's so many sightings and everything now is because we are in need of assistance, spiritual assistance, with the problem with the drugs, and the problem with crime, and the problem with abuse, and the problem with domestic violence, and all these other things that goes on in the communities of the reservation. There's more and more interaction with Sasquatch and people today, which goes back to what it used to be like and what it is now. He just kind of gave me his answer right there, and I thought that's a good idea to think about. I think people are thinking more about spiritual things when the people I talk to anyway, when we talk about Sasquatch. It's more of a, this is in a realm that makes you stop and think about your culture. At least they do.
I'm going to share a story that I heard, and I'm not going to tell you the source of it, but I tend to believe the source. And what I'd like you to do is to kind of say, yeah, that's something that could be or not could be. And this story involves a young Native person who was involved in an abusive relationship with a young Native girl. And this Native boy was abusive to her and roughed her up one night. And so she either threw him out of the house or he left. And this is on an Indian reservation. And he's going somewhere through the forest. And this was a word the storyteller used. He's accosted by two Sasquatches. And they rough him up. But let him go. We'll rough him up, but let him go. And what this person was trying to tell me, I think, was that these Sasquatches roughed this kid up because he had been abusive to this young girl. And I thought, okay, how would a Sasquatch know that? How would they involve themselves in human affairs like that? What do you say to a story like that? Is that feasible?
I say hooray for that.
Hooray for the Sasquatch
Squad.
Yeah. No, I think that's very possible. I know I've talked to many women and out on the reservation, women are out like 2 o'clock in the morning walking down darkened streets because there's no street lamps, all by themselves, and I've heard many tales of where women said they knew there was a Sasquatch following them and to protect them. And so they talk about that quite a bit in a loving way. They appreciate the company of like a guardian. And so that comes back to what you were just telling me, that maybe these were their answer to don't do this again, young man.
Yeah. That Sasquatch would involve themselves in human affairs to teach somebody a lesson about respect. I found that kind of extraordinary.
Yeah.
Sara, Dave, do you have any more questions for our guests?
Oh, no. This has been really thought-inspiring, Sherry. I like that concept that Sasquatch is perhaps there to maybe help or be a symbol of what I would see as sort of elusiveness and the sacred, and there are things out there bigger than us and that could pop our heads off but don't. That is an interesting thing. I think humans might act better when they know they're not in control, when there is other life out there. I think that's good for us to think about. That's kind of what I'm taking away from some of our conversation today, that maybe it would keep us more respectful.
Maybe we're not the highest form of life on
the
planet.
That's another way of saying it.
For most of all.
Yeah. Well, how about some closing thoughts for all of us?
Did you have any
I'll
other
start.
questions?
I'm always the nuts and bolts evidence guy here. It may not sound like it, but it's all relative. And for me, Bigfoot, when I go down my list of things that I'm interested in, I say, well, here I believe blah, blah, blah about this and that. And there's a 50% chance that's real. And for me, Bigfoot is the no-brainer, and that's because of what Sherry said. I mean, she's a witness herself. I totally believe her. I mean, it's hard to mistake, say, compared to a UFO, you see a light in the sky. Well, I saw a UFO. Well, maybe, but so many other things could be a light in the sky. But an 8 or 9 foot tall hairy hominid is not anything else except what you just saw.
Right.
I mean, setting aside the spiritual aspect, and maybe it was a projection or maybe something else, but it was there. So for me, and we have so much evidence, I mean, people who want to look at evidence can go to, I think my favorite site is BFRO, right? Was that the one that you recommend, Dan?
Well, they have a lot of evidence.
They accumulate evidence. There's lots of, there are thousands of counts of footprints. There are hundreds of reports, eyewitness reports. I mean, there's physical evidence, there's fur, there's DNA evidence. That's Melba Ketchum, the veterinarian, and my wife is a veterinarian, so I think I know a little bit about that industry, and I trust what she's discovered. So to me, Bigfoot is a no-brainer as far as existing, but I leave tonight's interview a little bit frustrated because everyone's made a really good case that Bigfoot is more than just a hairy hominid. Bigfoot may have implications for, as Sara said, a higher intelligence or a teaching mechanism for humans, and all that is very intriguing but also ultimately frustrating because it's still a giant mystery. But, that gives us more chances to have more programs, so I can't complain about that part.
Dan?
Are you intrigued? Are you frustrated?
Well, I'm struck by Sherry's comment that her involvement, with Bigfoot set her on a journey, because I feel like that's kind of happened to me too. Because first of all, as the typical white guy who wanted to run off into the forest and catch one and put him in a zoo and study them. And the more I've learned about Bigfoot and heard stories, both native and non-native stories, I think what we ought to do with Bigfoot is open an embassy for the Bigfoot people.
There you
like
go.
we would have an embassy for some interplanetary...
And it needs to be in a tribal land somewhere.
Yeah. So that we could dialogue with them. So that's quite a journey for me.
And there has been a trend also of communities or counties, right, who have made Bigfoot or Sasquatch, I don't know technically what the designation is, but they're a protected species.
Whatcom County they are.
With the assumption that not only do they exist, but that they are unlike, deer or some other animal that you have open hunting season, which I personally dislike, but the trend has been, at least in our little crazy corner of the country, that's what other people say about us. I think we're on the right track, though. But that's so Whatcom County is...
Whatcom County is...
And I think there's another... Where's
Oregon.
Where's Ape Caves at? Does anybody know?
Isn't that Oregon?
Yeah, it's Oregon.
Well, no, actually, Ape Caves it's kind of down south of... It's not... I don't know if it's in Lewis County or Klickitat County.
It's not.
But that's the other county that's that's protected legally.
So Washington State takes their Sasquatch pretty seriously.
I think so.
And why do you think that is? I mean, is that the
I
Native
think
American lobby is so powerful? That I don't
Maybe,
think
but
that's
I
the
think
case.
there's more believers than non. I think that's why that is.
There are more sightings. If you
And
go
they're
on-
not just around here. I mean, you hear them in every state. You hear
Right.
sightings. But I think we take them more serious.
We've got
You know,
so
you
many
said you talked
forests.
to a gentleman who said that there's more sightings and more encounters with Sasquatch up in this area than any place else. And so Washington has really taken that to heart, I think.
Yeah, go on the BFRO website and they have sightings, encounters by state. Washington maybe California, but that might only be because California has a bigger population. But Washington is right in the top.
Dan, for our listeners that might not know what BFRO is, what is...
Bigfoot Field Research Organization.
Okay.
And for $200, the nominal cost of $200, you can go out with them on an expedition. Because I went with them to Vancouver Island on a Sasquatch expedition.
You did do that. I forgot that you did that.
Yeah, and that was pretty...
BFRO.net, I think.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. Anyway, but there's a lot of info on their website.
Just think of getting back to the Native Americans that have had sightings and all that. And majority of them are not reported.
Yeah, they don't report.
So there's so many more.
Because like you said, the first encounter you had, you didn't want to...
No.
You didn't even want to tell
I
anybody.
didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah. Anything else for Sherry?
What?
You know, there's
Closing
one
remarks?
more thing. I got to put this down here. This is silly. But I was thinking, what about Chewbacca? Come on. No, we're talking spaceships.
Well,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
there's
it's
a
like
resemblance.
the creator of Star Wars.
I've never thought about that. But yes, that's interesting.
Yeah.
From a propaganda type conditioning
Yeah.
aspect, is it maybe what's the connection there?
Yeah.
Well, there are some people that have claimed that Steven Spielberg, through the movie E.T., has been desensitizing us to the possibility of
Of that.
alien contact. So maybe George Lucas did the same thing with Chewbacca.
Maybe so.
Don't they have sort of one thing that struck me when I've listened to vocalizations from Sasquatch is it sounds like nothing else, and it has almost a mechanical kind of sound to it. To me, you know, when I heard it, does it sound like Chewbacca? No.
Right, good question.
I don't know. I have to.
Well, that's why you need to listen to those Sierra sounds, or there's a gentleman up on the Lummi Reservation. I think his name is Frank Goes Behind, if I could use that name. And the reason I'm using that name is it's on the internet, so I'm thinking it's public knowledge. He recorded some vocalizations. Mm-hmm. So if you would go on YouTube and do Frank Goes Behind Lummi Bigfoot sounds, you could hear what is alleged to be a Sasquatch vocalization. Mm-hmm. And it is strange. It is like you wouldn't expect the sounds that are recorded to be coming from an 8 or 9 foot tall hominid.
And when you do hear them, you can tell it comes from a massive chest. Mm-hmm. The lung capacity of these yells is just amazing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for being on with us, Sherry.
Well,
please
thanks
come
for
back.
having me.
Yeah, please come back and visit with us again. And next time we'll have some more strange stories.
Okay, great.
And if you do make friends with Bigfoot, be sure to invite him or her on the show.
Yeah.
Okay.
First in line.
Yeah.
We'll need an interpreter.
Yeah, that's right. We may need some kind of interpreter.
Get Chewbacca in here.
Yeah. Okay,
All right.
cool.
Thanks for listening.